Hey class, Alec here. Today we're going to talk about government intervention in markets. This relates to our discussion the other day of efficiency versus equity. We talked about the efficiency of competitive markets. By the way, this is the third time I'm going over this, so I'm going to. It's. I like to talk too much. It's way too long, so I'm going to try and be more abbreviated or give you the Cliff Notes version of government intervention. Efficiency. We talked about Q star. We talked about Pareto optimal outcomes. And now we have to say, now the question is, well, are those outcomes, even though they may be efficient, are they fair? Okay, and you can see this fairness issue comes into play because down here in either our supply or demand curves, we have households. So now we're saying, okay, how does that affect households? Isn't it fair to households? So let's talk about price floors. Price floors are a minimum price allowed. In order for it to be effective or binding, the price floor must be greater than the equilibrium price, and it's intended to protect the supply side of the market. Essentially, and our first example is the minimum wage, and most of you are familiar with it because you work and receive the minimum wage. This is the market for unskilled labor, and government says that the equilibrium wage is too low. So they're going to mandate a wage minimum, something to the north of the equilibrium, and we run that across. Now, to get back to this, is to say our demand curve in labor markets are businesses. Businesses demand labor. Where does that labor come from? The supply side of the market in labor markets is households. We can see the intersection across these two curves, where our price line crosses these two curves. We have here is quantity demanded. Here we have quantity supplied. We know this to be called a surplus. In labor markets, surpluses are called unemployment. Now, let's think about this, the nature of the surplus here. Let's distill it down into two components, one that we should probably worry about and one that we should not be so keenly focused on. Run this down to the horizontal axis. Here is, again, QD. Here is QS. Here is the distance of our surplus. But you can see this is where we started, Q sub E, right? So our surplus consists of two portions. A is job losers. QD is to the left of our original equilibrium. And then B is job entrants. These are people who are now working who weren't willing and able to work at the equilibrium wage, but now at a higher minimum wage, they've entered the labor market. Our concern here with the unintended consequences of a minimum wage is this distance A, which again is job losers. Now, it could be that the number of workers are not changed. It could be, though, that the hours of work are reduced for workers, and that's on the horizontal axis. So there's different ways to look at the quantity of unskilled workers. But there's two things that go on here. Well, three things here is that potentially, depending on the elasticity of demand, the traditional or standard supply and demand model said there is going to be a loss of work opportunities for unskilled workers. The second thing that's going to go on, and this will show you why businesses are, small businesses in particular, are not fond of the minimum wage. Sorry. This is a transfer from businesses to workers who are still employed. So now you can see that the wage has gone up. You can see that the quantity demanded has gone down. This distance, this rectangle here, is a transfer of a monetary transfer from businesses to workers. The second thing that we're going to talk about here, let's put it in so it really stands out. We know that there's going to be efficiency losses in the market as well. If QE star, Pareto optimal outcome, assuming that the market for unskilled labor is competitive, there are going to be a deadweight loss that you can see in that orange shaded area. Okay, so let's talk about agricultural price supports. That's to the right here. So government comes in and says, you know what, a price is too low to support our farming community. So let's put a higher price on agricultural commodities. Let's put a price floor in place. And the same thing happens. You can see here that it intersects the demand curve first, the supply curve second, and we are going to have now the same situation as we had with minimum wage. We're going to have a surplus. Question to you is this price floor binding? The answer is yes. Why? Because it is above the equilibrium wage. So imagine this is dairy products, and by the way, we bought a record amount of dairy surplus last year in the history of price supports for the dairy industry. So government thinks that $2.15 a gallon is too low, and they mandate that the price must be $2.85 per gallon of milk. You can see there's a 70-cent increase in the price of milk. Well, who pays that? Well, the answer, here's the quantity demanded. That's the amount that consumers want to buy. And this rectangle right here is a transfer from consumers to farmers. Not the end of the story. We know that there's a surplus. They're not going to let this surplus rot in the field. What happens to that surplus? Government is going to buy. Now, there's going to be, here is the quantity supplied on the horizontal axis. Let's look at the costs of buying that surplus. It would be the quantity of the surplus times the price of each unit. This box here is the cost of the surplus. Okay, so how does government buy the surplus? By taxing consumers, right, or by taxing households in the United States. You can further see, and this is the last thing I'll talk. Oh, I got two more things to talk about. You can further see that there's a drop in consumption. Lastly, let's go to our you can clearly see that there's also efficiency losses. So the moral of the story with agricultural price supports is that consumers consume less, pay a higher price, transfer income to farmers, are taxed at a higher rate in order for the government to first purchase the surplus and then store that surplus. Okay, price ceilings. Let's talk about price ceilings. This is a situation where government says we're going to cap or allow you to reach a price that is a maximum. In order for this to be effective or binding, the price ceiling must be less than the equilibrium price, and it's intended to protect the supply side of the market. Notice what's going on here, and this is important, is that government comes in and says this is too low. Oh, excuse me. I don't want to start over. This is too high. So government comes in and says, let's put a price ceiling right here and run that across. What we're going to have here, and when we're looking at rent control, we're talking about the city, inner city rents. I saw a headline in the Columbian a while back that said that the Portland metropolitan area is facing some of the fastest rising rents in the United States. And this is about 2 years ago. And you can see here, now notice what happens here. The supply is landowners, the demand, of course, is households. This price ceiling will hit the supply curve first and the demand curve second, and you can see this distance here is called a shortage. So ultimately, though, we know that rising prices are an indication of a shortage in the market. Now government is using a shortage to fight a shortage, which strategically doesn't sound like a very good idea. I think most economists will agree that rent control causes so many unintended consequences that it doesn't solve the problem it was intended to solve. Okay, now notice what happens here. So our conclusion for rent control is that it's going to cause a shortage. There's going to be difficulty for renters to find available rental units. And what happens here is that notice we could have a better solution. How many people would be in favor of offering a subsidy to renters and say, hey, you know what? We think that the price is $2,000 a month per rental unit. You can only afford to pay $1,500 a month. Therefore, we're going to send you a subsidy of $500 a month. Fairly easy solution. Another solution is this. Notice what happens here. Use the tools of supply and demand to figure out how to solve this problem. Maybe if we shifted out the supply curve to the right, we would then have an equilibrium 2 that is equal to the rents that we think people can afford. Just food for thought. Here is our change in supply. Okay, there's various ways to do that. Change in zoning, change in permitting, working with developers to create more affordable units, subsidizing developers. It's just for me the ultimate. I think the ultimate answer here is when you're looking at a market, use the tools of supply and demand to figure out a solution for that market. Okay, and sorry, this is my third go on this, so I'm getting kind of rambled in the head. But anyway, got more coming. Talk to you later. Bye.